Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Mythgard Academy. This is session number 27 on the Name of the Rose, and maybe the end of our discussion on the Name of the Rose, because we have gotten to the end of the book, and tonight we're going to talk about the movie a little bit as well. The film adaptation starring Sean Connery and Christian Slater when he was like 6. Actually, he was 17 at the time. I had to look it up because he looks like 12, seriously. It was like a very, very young Christian Slater, but he was in fact actually still a minor when this was filmed. It was a very interesting casting to capture a very young and naive Adso of Milk. Exactly. He was a friar minor, Eric, as it turned out, in that film. But before we talk about the film, we are going to talk about the not only the very end, but the frame as well. And before we talk about that, a couple quick announcements. One of which is that this weekend, in just a couple days, is Mountain Moot in Denver. Looking forward to getting to Denver. It's been a year and a half as we've been waiting until the snow thawed in the passes before we got there. But finally, I think the trail into town is open and we're able to make it to Denver for Mountain Moot at last. So that's going to be great fun this coming weekend on the 31st of May. Meantime, we are also approaching next month. We're now only a few weeks away from Mythmoot. It is going to be so much fun to gather with everybody again. Mythmoot is our big event of the year. It is sort of our biggest event in every dimension, and we are delighted to see the registrations that have already come in, the people who are able to make it. And don't forget that we are also going to, we also broadcast all of Mythmoot, everything that we can of Mythmoot in a streaming hybrid format. So if you're not able to make it to Leesburg, Virginia for the weekend of the 22nd, of the 19th to the 22nd, you can still sign up for Moot Hub, which enables you to again get access to just about everything, and of course also get access to the recordings of everything, so that you can see later what you miss live. In any case, that is always such a wonderful time, and I'm looking very much forward to that in a few weeks. So I hope you all join us for either, if you're in the Denver area, for Mountain Moot or for Mythmoot in a few weeks. You can find registration for either one of these things at blackberry.signumuniversity.org. All right, let us return to the very end of the book. Adso's final words. It is cold in this scriptorium. My thumb aches. I leave this manuscript. I do not know for whom. I no longer know what it is about. Stat rosa pristina nomine. Nomina nuda tenemus. Okay. So, yeah. Oh, sorry, Rebecca. Yeah, let me address that at the beginning. I'll address it at the beginning and the end. I said it's probably our last session on the Name of the Rose. Our next book, I was going to hold up the book, but I don't think it's going to work because it's green. Yeah, exactly. So you can't, the book that, what you do not see is The Peoples of Middle-earth, volume 12 of the history of Middle-earth. And Rebecca's question was, how easy is it going to be to follow along with it without having read any of the rest of the history of Middle-earth books? It's going to be fine. What I do in these classes is just kind of go through sort of chapter by chapter, like I did with this book. So it's a good way to kind of read this through. And even if you haven't read the others, I mean, there will be some references back to stuff that happened earlier on, but it's not like the history of Middle-earth is a linear narrative or anything like that. So, and this book in particular, I would add. The War of the Jewels, Volume 12, is kind of the second half. That and Morgoth's Ring together form like the later history of the Silmarillion, the development of the Silmarillion story. Peoples of Middle-earth is really like collection of the last scraps of stuff that Tolkien wrote, some of which is really, really interesting. But it was like in the days near the end of his life, at the end of his life, when he was like fiddling, and no longer like really kind of being systematic and rewriting the whole story. So yeah, it'll be totally fine. And that's what we're going to do next. We're going to start that after Mythmoot. So my plan is the Wednesday after Mythmoot to begin discussing the peoples of Middle-earth. And then we'll be done with the history of Middle-earth, which will be cool. Exactly, Eric. The peoples of Middle-earth is Tolkien filling in the corners. That's exactly right. Anyhow, okay. So, but let us return to Adso's final words. We see Adso. So, thinking about old Adso, the voice of the narrator that we've been getting throughout the book, and we've often talked about the voice of old Adso compared to the voice of young Adso, and the way in which old Adso was often reflecting back upon the experiences that he had when he was younger. It was clear that there were some moments where he was kind of understanding or realizing things for the first time, that he was processing things. We also did see moments where he was telling us what he felt at the time, not what he was he reflects on later. So the narrative voice has in that sense been complicated, and has not been kind of situated in just one place. The perspective, that is, of the narrator hasn't been situated in just the one place. The final notes are very emphatically old Adso, right? Old Adso having left young Adso entirely behind. And that final, like the last day stuff, which we discussed last time about him sort of finding the fragments, right? These seeds, and thinking like, is there some meaning in it? Is there some message that he can receive? Is there some way in which he can keep things alive? And his answer was basically no. Like there is no answer. And through that experience, we sort of got this transition from young Adso to old Adso, and now we're just with old Adso. And the last note is one, again, bringing us to my thumb aches, brings us very much to the present tense, right? The present has always felt like young Adso throughout the book. And the voice of old Adso was the voice of the future from within the frame of reference of the story, right? As that frame of reference has shifted to the end, we now are very present with old Adso in a way that we haven't been before, right? Now, we might have guessed, for instance, that he was in a scriptorium writing his book, but we didn't know that, in fact, right? Again, like we've never been invited to picture where Adso is sitting. I mean, Melk, we knew he was located in Melk, but but do you see what I mean by the present in that sense? Here we are invited to not only visually picture old Adso sitting in the scriptorium, but we are given his experience, right? His feelings, how cold he is because it's cold in the scriptorium, how his thumb aches. And that is our introduction as we're kind of forced through these sensory experiences. We are forced into the perspective of old Adso. And when we're there, the final note is a sad one, right? I leave this manuscript. I do not know for whom. Remember, he was thinking maybe he would receive a message from the scraps that he found and the books that he subsequently collected, but he kind of doubts. Right? He confided to us that he rather doubts that there is any message, that there is nothing speaking to him. And his last admission here is that he doesn't know to whom he is speaking either. I leave this manuscript. I do not know for whom. I have no idea. He doesn't know who his target audience is. There isn't a purpose that he has in mind. Those two things often sort of go together, right? To have a purpose in mind for your composition and to have an intended audience, right? Normally, you know, if you have an intended audience, there's something you're trying to communicate to them. But you know, that may, you know, perhaps you can have an intended audience and don't have something you're trying to communicate. Though, sidebar, I never believe authors when they say that, ever. It's one of my rules. Whenever an author says, oh, there's no meaning in it, that just gives me permission to ignore anything they have to say about it. But they're always wrong. Always wrong. And the more an author says, oh, yes, no, there's nothing in it, the more I can tell that they're uncomfortable, that they don't want. They're uncomfortable with analytical discussions, right? They don't want to, people to be discussing it. By the way, this is such a pleasant difference with Tolkien. Tolkien was always willing to analyze his own book, right? To think about it and quote it and do, like make arguments drawing from his text and that sort of thing. Exactly, Jackie. Yeah, when they say there's nothing in it or I didn't really intend anything at all by it, they don't want people discussing them, is what I'm hearing too. And of course, they may mean nothing more than what Tolkien said when he said that, like, it has no special meaning or message, meaning it's not an allegory, right? Like, I'm not, there's no, there's no political message. You're not supposed to decode it in a particular way. But of course, that's not the same thing as saying that it has no message. Eric, it is like them saying, don't scrutinize my work, just accept it. More, it's almost like I would quite like you to praise it, just don't scrutinize it, right? And I always feel like, I have bad news for you, my friend. I cannot do that. I cannot praise it without scrutinizing it. That's not how it works. Anyway, yeah. So anyhow, but here's Adso. So anyway, so it is possible. Again, people talk like that. So in some ways, you could say, oh no, like they're not trying to like teach a particular thing to their intended audience. And I don't mean that exactly when I say, it has no, it doesn't communicate anything, or like, does it communicate anything? But Adso here, when you have no idea who your intended audience is at all, then what you're communicating is kind of in a different category altogether, isn't it? That is, here he is, it suggests, on the one hand, that his primary audience was himself. That is, that what Adso was doing was processing. That's the sense in which I mean his primary audience is himself. The experience that we have seen old Adso having as he has gone through and parsed his own experience and thought things through seems to have been a really important part of this, right? And now when he comes to the end of it, so the process of writing it sort of accomplished that for him. And now that it's done, he has no idea what the manuscript itself is intended for. Writing it, he clearly had a reason he wanted to write it, or multiple reasons he wanted to write it. But now that it's written, he didn't have the audience in mind. But he's going to leave it. And of course, the whole thing, through the story and his experience with William in the library and his own experience that he just described in the last pages of finding the scraps of paper left over after the fire and sort of recollecting some of the books. This book has been very interested in the question of manuscripts just getting left and being discovered later on by people, right? And so that is where he leaves his book. And his final note is, I no longer know what it is about. Which is fair enough. Again, that is not the same thing as saying it's not about anything. I think in part that is Adso's confession. He began as if recording the events for the sake of recording the events, right? Like the, mysterious and momentous and horrifying, palpitating things that happened during that last week at that abbey should be remembered, right? And of course, Brother William and Jorge and all of those should be remembered as well. So he spoke at the beginning of the book as narrator, as if that were the reason, right, why he was doing these things. But now when he's come to the end of it, when the manuscript is there, sitting in front of him, he's no longer sure. Because I think, in part, I think that's a reflection on the fact that he realizes that it kind of became a little bit more, well, not exactly autobiographical in the sense of being about his life, but I don't know what, auto-contemplative, right? As I say, working through his own experiences. The experience that we joked about a number of times during our discussions, the way in which, like, the murder mystery gets forgotten about for a long time, and what happens instead? Instead, we have Adso listening to these conversations and working out his own existential problems, right? Adso's relationship with truth, Adso's relationship with love, Adso's own experience trying to sort out the whole uncomfortable triad thing, right? All of that stuff. Adso understanding and processing these big things and thinking back on his youthful experiences as a way of doing that. That we saw the story get kind of carried away in those things and leave the story of William and the mystery and everything behind. So again, in part, I think I no longer know what it is about is a way of sort of reflecting on that, right? And being like, I didn't exactly end up writing the book that I thought I was writing when we set out. Yeah, JJ, he does not seem to contemplate here how edible his book is. But actually, though I know you're joking about that, it is interesting, isn't it, though? Because remember what the eating of the book was about. In Revelation, remember what the eating of the book is about. The eating of the book is about absorbing the book into, like, making it a part of yourself so that you yourself can be equipped to be the vehicle to communicate that to others. That's why the angel gives the book to John and tells him to eat it. And remember, we were just discussing how Jorge reverses that, how Jorge's eating of the book is designed to conceal the book and prevent it from being transmitted to anybody else. So in a sense, of course, Adso he's neither eating it nor is he giving it to anybody else to eat, right? In either sense, right? In either Jorge's sense or John's sense of eating the book. He's just going to leave it on the shelf, not knowing if anyone is ever going to eat it at all, right? Yeah. And then he leaves us with the final line, the final famous Latin line, Stat rosa pristina nomine, nomina nuda tenemus. The pristina is a really interesting word. Rosa pristina is talking about the rose like the old rose, the original rose. But I think the Latin pristina, Eric, maybe you can help me with this. I think the Latin pristina has some of the overtones of the English word pristine as well. Like, it doesn't just mean, like, it's often translated like, you know, the ancient rose or the old rose or whatever, the rose from previous times. But anyway, yeah, but I think it's more than that, right? Yeah, it's something like unblemished, right? Yeah, exactly. Yes, early or primitive, but with that sense of Tomas, that unblemished sense is what I'm thinking of. That sense of, and of course, this is typical of Latin. I mean, that is part of the Greco-Roman, really, concept, was the older you go, the farther back in history you go, the closer you're getting to the Golden Age, right? The world is in decline. Everybody knows that. Tolkien still knows that, certainly. And so when you're thinking back to ancient things, you're probably thinking back to things that are purer than they are nowadays. And so Fencing Frog, there is kind of a sense in which it's at least similar to that idea of virginal, untroubled, unblemished, undisturbed, uncorrupted, as things have become in these later days. Nomina nuda tenemus. We hold the naked names. All we're left with now. Like, there's the ancient, the old, the unblemished rose. The thing and the name, right? The final sentence that we get here, the final Latin sentence, is about names and things. Shockingly, right? But there's a very clear trajectory to it, which we've been kind of building up to through the whole book, and is finally stated in this last sentence. The thing is the old thing, the thing of older days, and it's gone, and it can't ever come back, like the library. Like the library, like Adso's youth, right? These things are gone. They're as gone as the Golden Age. And the tragedy of the library illustrates kind of how the world goes. The world is always changing, and it's not for the better, right? What we have, tenemus, what we hold on to now. And tenemus is not just have in the sense of like possess. It's whole. Again, Erica, I know you're good with the Latin too. If I'm recalling correctly, tenemus, it means to hold, like to hold on to. Like the root of the word tenacious is this word. All we have to hold on to, all that we can hold on to, and what we do hold on to are just names, naked names, names without things, because the things are gone. The names are all that's left. Very good. Thank you. That's what I vaguely remembered. Eric reminds me that habere is to have, tenere is to hold or grasp or keep. Yes. We hold, grasp, and there's a sense of futility there. Just like we hold on to the names, the words, the signs, the memories of things, and we hold on to them tenaciously. We grasp them. Like Adso, grasping at the fragments of pages and bindings and things that he found in the ruins of the abbey, right? And presumably just as uselessly. And of course, Aristotle's comedics are, is I was going to say the symbol, but that's not quite right. The representative of this whole thing, right? Just as William knew what Aristotle's poetics must be, right? And more or less what his argument probably was, right? He could, because he was grasping, he was holding on to naked, all he had were words, references, right? References, some quotations, some allusions, and his own reason, right? Maureen says, I suppose as Adso faces his own death, the book itself is not permanent, like the other lost books from the library. Yeah, even his own book. And of course, Maureen, he's here confronting his own impermanence. He's going to leave the book behind. Is anybody ever going to find it? Is anybody ever going to read it? He doesn't know. But yeah, he's just talked about William's death, right? Everything, the whole thing is passing away. And I agree, Eric, nomen nuda, naked names, is an odd concept. Eric says, as if the names are the real thing, which we merely wear concepts like clothes. Yeah, naked. I mean, the sense that I get from we're holding on to naked names is naked in the sense of like there is nothing else. Names unattached to things. Though it is interesting, Eric, I think in my own head, I'm almost reversing the metaphor, aren't I? It's almost as if I was thinking as if all we have left are scraps of clothes and the body is gone. But that's the reverse of what he says, right? He sort of, again, the word nuda, naked, suggests, seems to connect names with bodies, as you say. So he's implying that it's the clothes that are gone, which is weird, right? Because the names are adorning, the thing is the substance, right? And the nomina, the names, just are the signs that point to it. If one thing is the adornment and the other thing is the body, you'd think, right? That the rose was the body, the things were the body, and the names were the sign, were the clothes. But that doesn't seem to be what's suggested. Now, on the one hand, I don't think we're locked into just thinking about this in terms of a naked body. I think that just naked in the sense of having nothing else, right? The names alone, the names by themselves, the names plain and disconnected with anything else. But yeah, it is It is, yeah, stripped and unadorned. Exactly. Yes. Um, yeah, and JJ, that's a really great question. Naked, but are they ashamed? Of course, JJ is thinking about Adam and Eve. Um, and, JJ, I get the sense that the nomina are nuda, and we're the ones who are ashamed of that in this last sentence. It's not that the names are naked and ashamed, but they're naked and we're ashamed of it. Like, we feel the loss. We feel we are conscious, maybe even self-conscious of their nudity, because we can't we no longer have the power to clothe them. We can't return to the Rosa Pristina, right? Fencing Frog says, are we back to Jesus not owning his clothes again? Whoa. I'll have to think about that. Oof. Man. I actually feel like there's like a whole moot paper in that question. Yeah. Because the position of the Franciscans that he did not own his own clothes. Yeah, that is really interesting. So if the Franciscans are right, the Franciscan view has a kind of pristine quality to it, right? That Jesus was unencumbered by worldly things, worldly possessions. Even his own clothes he didn't own, right? But the Franciscans don't win the debate. And so, in that sense, the Rosa Pristina, like that's yet another example of the Rosa Pristina being removed from us, right? And yeah, Mighty Felix, you're completely right. I mean, nomina, name, word, verba. I mean, that's what Jesus is called in the New Testament, the verba, the word. So, yeah, it does seem to connect straight back to Jesus again. Wow, that's really interesting. And so exactly, Fencing Frog, in that sense, the naked word could be, the ascended Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, even the pre-incarnation Jesus. Okay, and here's another way to think about it, totally unconnected. Notice the two parallel noun phrases, Rosa Pristina and nomina nuda. And on the one hand, we've talked about the associations with those two terms, pristina and nuda. But of course, when we look at them together, it seems there's a clear sexual overtone to the two of them as well, right? Eric, as you said, nomina nuda is a very striking phrase. And so if the name is naked and the rose is pristine, is virginal, right, which will never come again, and we are just left grasping naked names. Grasping naked names sounds kind of scandalous, right? Sounds a little bit risque, a little bit sordid. there have been many times when we have been invited to contemplate the carnal entanglements of various kinds in this book. William was quick to, well, not dismiss them exactly, but to suggest that they were of lesser importance than the larger things, the issue of intellectual pride and that sort of thing. But that sense of grasping, that final image of us grasping naked things sounds sordid, right? Does not sound pristine. So it gives this sort of sexual overtone to the two, uses the carnal metaphor, which again, we've seen used, the different kinds of lust and all that sort of thing. And no, Adso didn't ever know the peasant girl's name. Nope. Anyway, so as with so many things in this book, there are lots of different ways to think about what's going on here. And I think we can see some trends and how it follows some of the trends. But it seems fairly clear that Adso, old Adso, with whom we are sitting now in his cold scriptorium as his thumb aches, is left with this. He grasps at these last metaphors as ways to try to bring together all of these things, not into like one neat and perfect summary or something like that. But this sense of loss, this sense of the past and the present, this seems to me an important element. It correlates with, remember how I was just saying in the narrative frame, right? We're being brought into the present here. We are with old Adso as he finishes writing the book. And that it seems to me very important that we end there. And I think that this last sentence emphasizes how important that is, because we are brought to the reality, the cold, painful reality, that in our present world, we have lost things, right? Lost like the Golden Age is lost. Lost like the library is lost. Lost like William is lost. Lost like Adso's virginity was lost, right? To acknowledge the sexual overtones there as well. We look back from the present back at the past, and we can kind of see, kind of imagine the Rosa Pristina. But in the end, all we have left is to grasp at the nomina nuda instead. Yes, like Aristotle's Comedics lost Feanaro. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So, and that dynamic, it's been building, right? Like we've been aware of loss and the potential for loss, especially, of course, it became much more poignantly clear as the library was burning. But it's not like that was something that has fixated our attention throughout the book, right? It kind of grows and then crashes in here at the end. And it's part of this narrative shift towards, again, the later days, the present time, where we really see it. And then it gets pointed to and encapsulated in this last phrase. Maureen, yes, and the love that he lost as well. Absolutely. Even though, she was almost certainly not a witch. All right, I don't want to spend too much time on the frame, but let's glance back at the frame. Okay. I'm going to read some segments of the prologue, just to kind of get a sense for what Echo is doing and the extent to which he's doing it in this prologue. On August 16th, 1968, I was handed a book written by a certain Abbé Vallée, Le manuscript des Dom Adson de Melk, traduit en français d'après l'édition des Dom G. Mabillon aux Presses des Abbés de la Source, Paris, 1842. Supplemented by historical information that was actually quite scant, the book claimed to reproduce faithfully a 14th century manuscript that in its turn had been found in the monastery of Melk by the great 18th century man of learning to whom we owe so much information about the history of the Benedictine order. The scholarly discovery, I mean mine, the third in chronological order, entertained me while I was in Prague, waiting for a dear friend. 6 days later, Soviet troops invaded that unhappy city. I managed, not without adventure, to reach the Austrian border at Linz, and from there I journeyed to Vienna, where I met my beloved, and together we sailed up the Danube. In a state of intellectual excitement, I read with fascination the terrible story of Adso of Melk, and I allowed myself to be so absorbed by it that, almost in a single burst of energy, I completed a translation, using some of those large notebooks from the Papeterie Joseph Gilbert, it is so pleasant to write if you use a felt tip pen. Okay. Now, what's happening here? Where are we? What is the frame? Who's speaking? Right? So we have Umberto Eco speaking. And from the beginning, it seems to me unclear whether we're supposed to believe him or not, right? And Jackie, I agree. It sounds so much like something Tolkien would have done. In fact, it sounds very much like something that Tolkien actually did, right? The prologue to The Lord of the Rings is like this in many ways. Now, it's unlike it in other ways. The primary difference I would point to between the prologue to The Lord of the Rings and the prologue to The Name of the Rose is that Umberto Eco makes his own character the hero of the story, and Tolkien does not, right? Tolkien's editor, translator persona, from which perspective he explicitly writes the prologue. He's writing it in his own voice. I have to put that in air quotes because it's not his own voice. It's a character, right? He didn't exactly discover the Red Book of Westmarch. But the editorial voice is a persona that he has developed and is writing into the frame. And those two projects are very, very similar. Now, again, the big difference is that Umberto Eco makes his editorial translator voice the hero, right? This is all about his adventures, his scholarly adventures in finding this. And whereas Tolkien does talk about the discovery of the Red Book, but he doesn't. The primary difference is he doesn't give us any of like the vicissitudes of like how he came to discover the Red Book, right? Or anything like that. He just, though he does make some assertions. If you think about, for instance, his reference to Findegil King's Rider and the other copies and stuff like that, like he's clearly not just like, this is not just somebody who lucked out and found the Red Book of Westmarch, right? And like, it is to that like happy accident that he owes his scholarly reputation entirely, right? It isn't like that, because he makes it clear, Tolkien's narrator, I mean, makes it clear that he has done exhaustive other research and that he has engaged with other scholars and that he has dug up other manuscripts to corroborate and compare. So all that stuff. Umberto Eco makes the finding of the manuscripts, of the manuscripts themselves, the drama, right? Tolkien's focus in the prologue to The Lord of the Rings is to provide, he wants his modern speaker, right? His modern narrator, editor, translator figure. He wants that person to be in the background. He wants it to be present. He wants you to hear that voice, right? Because that's part of the fun frame, to give you the documentary frame of the Lord of the Rings story. Umberto Eco, though, doesn't want his editor, translator, scholar voice to be in the background. He wants that to be the protagonist. Why? Not just because he's arrogant and Tolkien is humble, though I think Tolkien is humble, though I'm not going to draw any conclusions about Umberto Eco's arrogance, but that's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is the process of discovery is what Umberto Eco is interested in, and it's what this frame focuses on. He is the hero, not necessarily just because he's glamorizing himself, right? Or, trying to make out that he's awesome. What he is describing is a scholar's process of discovery and the vicissitudes thereof, right? And the stuff that happens and how you find something and then you lose something and then you come across a reference later, but you can't prove it. And then all that. It's that process. That's what the prologue is about. That's what he wants to draw attention to. Whereas again, that's not what Tolkien was interested in focusing on, in having us focus on in his prologue. But of course it is what Umberto Eco wants us to focus on. And notice how this fits with what we were just talking about. What is a scholar doing? Remember how I was saying how similar Eco's description of, well, not old Adso, middle-aged Adso, in that one visit to Italy when he went to the ruins of the abbey, how similar that experience is to a modern medievalist who goes to visit some of these sites, and you're climbing around the ruins and you have to imagine how things were, but you can't really see it, and all you've got are just a few walls and a few bricks, right? And you don't have the whole books, you just have little bits and fragments blowing in the wind. Like, that's the medievalist experience, right? And what this prologue describes, the adventure, the excitement, the triumph of this prologue, is finding, well, not quite the Rosa Pristina, but something closer to it. Something more than just the nomina nuda, the naked names. He gets the book, Adso's book, and he, again, it's not the Rosa Pristina, because notice he doesn't find the manuscript, right? He finds a French translation of the manuscript that was published in 1842. But it's a manuscript he's never heard of and a story that he hasn't done. And yes, not just a medievalist, any antiquarian. I'm thinking about medievalists, because of my own experience and also because of the medieval time frame of the book. But yes, certainly any antiquarian would have that same kind of experience. So, okay, anyway, the opening here ends with, in a state of intellectual excitement, he does a translation. He does an Italian translation of the French translation of Adso's Latin manuscript. Writing pleasantly in those large notebooks, that doubtless you're familiar with. I quickly found the Vetera and Electa at the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève, but to my great surprise, so remember, he loses it. That is, what he loses is the book that Abbé Vallée wrote, right? That Abbé Vallée translated. He doesn't give us any details about what happened between him and his beloved, but she leaves and takes the book with her, right? So yes, he loses his beloved and he loses the book. And he's hunting for it. He's trying to find any other copy, not just of that book, but any other reference to Adso's story, to Adso's manuscript. I quickly found the Vetera and Electa at the Bibliothèque Saint-Geneviève, but to my great surprise, the edition I came upon differed from the description in two details. First, the publisher, who was given here as Montelon, ad repam PP Augustinianorum, propre Pontem S. Michaelis, and also the date, which was 2 years later. I needn't add that these Analecta did not comprehend any manuscript of Adso or Adson of Milk. On the contrary, as anyone interested can check, they are a collection of brief or medium-length texts, whereas story transcribed by Vallée ran to several hundred pages. At the same time, I consulted illustrious medievalists, such as the dear and unforgettable Etienne Gilson, but it was evident that the only Vetera and Electa were those I had seen at Saint-Geneviève. A quick trip to the Abbé de la Source in the vicinity of Passy, and a conversation with my friend Dom Arne Lonstedt further convinced me that no Abbé Vallée had published books on the Abbey's presses. For that matter, non-existent. French scholars are notoriously careless about furnishing reliable bibliographical information, but this case went beyond all reasonable pessimism. I began to think I had encountered a forgery. Yeah, I love seeing Etienne Gilson mentioned here. Indeed, a very famous medievalist, one of the great medievalists of his time. Yes, I too love the term reasonable pessimism. Yeah. And yes, Bricktails, shots fired at French scholars indeed. So here's our narrator, editor, translator hero, who has lost his copy of the Abbé Vallée, Vallée's translation of Adso's manuscript, and not only cannot find another copy of that book, but cannot find any evidence that that book ever existed. And in fact, all of the evidence that he is finding suggests that it didn't ever exist and wasn't ever published, such that he begins to suspect that he had encountered a forgery. And yes, Bricktails, I think you were very right to see a parallel between Umberto Eco taking shots at French scholars here and William taking shots at university scholars in Paris. Yes, absolutely. Okay. If something new had not occurred, I would still be wondering where the story of Adso of Milk originated. But then, in 1970, in Buenos Aires, as I was browsing among the shelves of a little antiquarian bookseller on Corrientes, not far from the more illustrious Patio del Tango of that great street, I came upon the Castilian version of a little work by Milo Temesvar on the use of mirrors in the game of chess. It was an Italian translation of the original, which, now impossible to find, was in Georgian. Tbilisi. I've never known how to pronounce that city. Tbilisi. Anyway, however you pronounce that Georgian city, published in 1934. Tbilisi. So it's Tbilisi. Okay, great. So I did it more or less correctly. Okay. And here, to my great surprise, I read copious quotations from Adso's manuscript, though the source was neither Vallée nor Mabillon. It was Father Athanasius Kircher. But which work? A scholar, whom I prefer not to name, later assured me that, and he quoted indexes from memory, the great Jesuit never mentioned Adso of Milk. But Temesvar's pages were before my eyes, and the episodes he cited were the same as those of the Vallée manuscript. The description of the labyrinth in particular left no room for doubt. I concluded that Adso's memoirs appropriately share the nature of the events he narrates, shrouded in many shadowy mysteries, beginning with the identity of the author and ending with the abbey's location, about which Adso is stubbornly, scrupulously silent. Now, I'm not going to try to sort through all of the, Italian, Castilian, Georgian versions of all this. The point is, his excitement in happening across evidence that the story of Adso really existed, that it wasn't just made up by whoever forged that copy of the Abbé Vallée that he had originally had, right? And yes, Eric says, Mabillon is a fun mention because he devised rules for distinguishing genuine manuscripts from false ones. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so again, notice how he is not picking up on, but anticipating the theme of, losing the pristine rose and, the Rosa Pristina and only holding on to the nomina nuda. How his search for Adso is kind of like Adso trying to reconstruct the library. The multiple, yes, almost like the way that that William had to like reconstruct Aristotle. Yeah. Yes. And yes, it is like, it does put Adso's manuscript in a parallel position to the Comedics itself, right? To the forbidden book. It's almost like it has been a forbidden book. On sober reflection, I find few reasons for... this is near the end. As he's... so he does confirm that it exists. And remember, he did a translation from when he had the book originally. So the problem is not that he lost the story entirely. He has the story. He has his translation of the story. The translation of the French version of Adso's manuscript. He just didn't know if it was legit anymore, right? But anyway, having done all this research and found all this stuff, he has traced it back and realizes Adso totally does exist. On sober reflection, I find few reasons for publishing my Italian version of the obscure neo-Gothic French version of a 17th century Latin edition of a work written in Latin by a German monk toward the end of the 14th century. First of all, what style should I employ? The temptation to follow Italian models of the period had to be rejected as totally unjustified. Not only does Adso write in Latin, but it is also clear from the whole development of the text that his culture, or the culture of the Abbey, which clearly influences him, dates back even further. It is manifestly a summation over several centuries of learning and stylistic quirks that can be linked with the late medieval Latin tradition. Adso thinks and writes like a monk who has remained impervious to the revolution of the vernacular, still bound to the pages housed in the library he tells about, educated on patristic scholastic texts, and his story, apart from the 14th century references and events, which Adso reports with countless perplexities and always by hearsay, could have been written, as far as the language and the learned quotations go, in the 12th or 13th century. Okay, so again, what's he getting at here? What style should I employ? So notice he says, basically, one potential obvious answer to that question is, well, you're telling a story that takes place in 14th century Italy. So write it in the style, translate it in the style of a 14th century Italian work. And he's like, no, oh my goodness, that would be horrible. Why? Because it's not an Italian work. It's a work that was written in Germany, first of all, but secondly, was written about an abbey that was in Italy, yes, but not Italian, and certainly not in Italian. Notice how he points out basically how, like, out of step, in a sense, the abbey and its monks were with the contemporary vogue of vernacular, of course, means the language of the people. So, of course, during the Middle Ages, especially during the 13th and 14th century in Italy, it became increasingly popular to write in the vernacular, that is to say, to write in Italian instead of writing in Latin. This is, of course, Dante is the great champion, a great champion. He considered himself the great champion. He was a great champion of writing in the vernacular. And this is why, of course, he writes the Divine Comedy in Italian rather than in Latin, which some considered a bit scandalous, because it concerns sacred matters, and would seem more justly to be written in Latin rather than in the language of the peasants. Anyway, okay, so but Adso has no part in that tradition. So again, he's talking about how additional levels. He begins with that. I love that sentence at the top. My Italian version of the obscure neo-Gothic French version of a 17th century Latin edition of a work written in Latin by a German monk towards the end of the 14th century about Italy, right? About an abbey in Italy. All of these different layers, all of the complexities here that he's trying to sift through, right? On the other hand, there is no doubt that in translating Adso's Latin into his own neo-Gothic French, Vallée took some liberties, and not only stylistic liberties. For example, the characters speak sometimes of the properties of herbs, clearly referring to the Book of Secrets attributed to Albertus Magnus, which underwent countless revisions over the centuries. It is certain that Adso knew the work, but the fact remains that passages he quotes from it echo too literally both formulas of Paracelsus and obvious interpolations from an edition of Albertus unquestionably dating from the Tudor period. However, I discovered later that during the time when Vallée was transcribing, mente, the manuscript of Adso, 18th century editions of the Grand and the Petit Albertus Magnus, now irreparably corrupt, were circulating in Paris. In any case, how could I be sure that the text known to Adso or the monks whose discussions he recorded did not also contain, among glosses, scholia, and various appendices, annotations which would go on to enrich subsequent scholarship? You following this? Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. Echo, is reading Abbe Vallée's translation of Adso's manuscript. And he says, okay, I can tell that Vallée is making some stuff up. That he is taking liberties and more than just stylistic liberties. You'll remember the discussions about herbs, right? Between the herbalist. Which one was that? Severinus? I'm losing track of their names already. I think that was Severinus, the herbalist, and William, right? And they have these extensive discussions of herbs and their uses and such. So Echo, the careful scholar, our careful scholar, narrator, translator person, kind of is sort of boasting a little tiny bit. He's kind of triumphing over Vallée. He's caught Vallée. Caught him red-handed. Probably. Adding stuff. What did Vallée do? So, in Adso's manuscript, when William and Severinus are talking about the herbs, Adso was clearly, in the opinion of Abbe Vallée, was clearly referring to the Book of Secrets attributed to Albertus Magnus. It was a well-known discussion of the properties of herbs. So Abbe Vallée reads Adso's manuscript and says, yeah, Adso is thinking about this Albertus Magnus passage. So what does Abbe Vallée do? Abbe Vallée goes and gets a copy of the book and adds to it. Imports stuff that Adso didn't say. Because, like, so Abbe Vallée is like, Adso, I'm picking up what you're putting down, right? You're intending references to Albertus Magnus here. So I'm going to just add some more. I'm going to fill it out a little bit, right? But our modern translator catches him. He can prove that the passages that are quoted from Albertus Magnus in Abbe Vallée were not written by Adso, because some of the passages quoted by the Abbe Vallée in what is meant to be his translation of Adso's manuscript clearly contain interpolations from an edition of Albertus Magnus dating from the Tudor period. Mic drop. Scholarly mic drop. By the way, this is the kind of thing that scholarly reputations are built on, right? When you can do this kind of thing. So he thinks he can prove this, but wait, it's not just about boosting. He's not just arrogant, right? He's not just rushing to press so that he can do down Abbe Vallée and prove something interesting about, to a previous scholar's discredit. Instead, he has this other reflection. He realizes that at the time when Abbe Vallée was translating, there were circulating in Paris, where he was doing the translation, editions of the Grand et Petit Albert, meaning the Big Albert and the Little Albert, like the full, there's two different collections of Albertus Magnus's writings. There were these two different versions of Albertus Magnus circulating in Paris in the 19th century when Abbe Vallée was translating Adso. And these are the ones that were dating from the Tudor period. But notice he then points out, he's like, okay, but where did those come from? The ones from the Tudor period. The Tudor scribe who copied the manuscript of Albertus Magnus, which is clearly datable to the Tudor period. Where did he get it? Where did he get his information? Could it be possible that these interpolations into Albertus Magnus actually date back from the 14th century? Maybe they were in circulation somehow, but not attested. And so, in fact, what he's discovered is not just that the Abbe Vallée was wrong or adding stuff. Maybe what he's actually doing is contributing indirectly to Albertus Magnus scholarship. Right? Where did the Tudor scholars get this? Why did it get interpolated? Well, right? Remember, this is him listing like one of the pros. Why should you write this? Why, the cons are like, but this is all kind of ridiculous to do this at like fifth hand and whatever. And does anybody care? But this is one of the cons. He could contribute to, the pool of knowledge, even of something indirect like Albertus Magnus. So he's going to go ahead and do it. Right? Because some problems are opportunities. Anyway, it's really complicated. But what he gives us in the frame is a picture of how distant we are from the original text. Think about where we started tonight with Adso in the cold scriptorium with his thumb aching. That sense of immediacy, that sense of being brought into the present with old Adso. But all of that is placed within a frame which emphasizes the vast difference. Not difference, distance. The vast distance between Umberto Eco and Adso, and therefore us and Adso. That we're getting this really indirect, corrupted, partial version. We're just, having read the story, right? And I know it's put in the introduction, but I always read the last anyway. That's why I'm talking about it last. You see also why I wanted to come back and talk about this last. We can appreciate this so much more when we come to it at the end. Anyway, having had this very immediate experience with young and old Adso in reading this story, we are reminded that this entire book is fragments picked up out of the grass, like Adso at the ruins of the Abbey at the end. And that this is what it is to read medieval literature. This is what it is to, or ancient literature, right? This is what it, because you can't get back to you can't have the Rosa Pristina. The library always burns in the end, and you're only left with the scraps, and that's what we have. Anyway, okay. In the last few minutes, let's talk about the film. Oh, hang on. One more slide, and then the film. In short, I am full of doubts. I really don't know why I have decided to pluck up my courage and present, as if it were authentic, the manuscript of Adso of Melk. Let us say it is an act of love, or if you like, a way of ridding myself of numerous, persistent obsessions. And again, hear the echo. The echo of, I leave this manuscript. I do not know for whom. I no longer know what it is about, right? I love the parallel of Umberto Eco. And yes, the play that y'all are doing. This is the Umberto Eco, right? It's the echo of Echo, right? Yeah. He is the echo. And we see him actively echoing Adso. Or is Adso echoing him? Because this is in the introduction and Adso's at the end. And also, there isn't an Adso. We're not really close to him, right? What we're close to is Umberto Eco's laborious recreation through many translations of Adso's manuscript, which he has never seen and doesn't know that anyone will ever see. Yeah. Anyway, now let's talk about the movie. All right. So there's a lot that we could say about the film. If I had to give an overall assessment, I would say a very similar thing about the Name of the Rose film that I said about the Watership Down animated film, the old one, back in the day. Because, of course, we did the Watership Down class in Mythgard Academy prior to the release of the Netflix version. But that's okay. I'm not going to talk about that. But some of you may remember that what I said about the Watership Down adaptation was that it got almost everything correct except for the things that mattered. And I feel much the same about this film. It's in many ways a very close adaptation that captures almost everything in the book except everything the book was actually interested in and invited us to be interested in. And on the one hand, like, I'm not trying to say that that makes it a bad movie. I'm not trying to say even necessarily that makes it a bad adaptation. I find it a little bit disappointed. I found myself a little disappointed. I found it disappointing, just because, well, it didn't feel to me, and I say this knowing what I'm about to say is critfic, so like disclaimer in advance. The film did not give me the impression that the people who made the film, the people who wrote the film, had put much effort into thinking about the book. So much of what happens in the book is simplified and trivialized, not just simplified, like you've got to streamline things in order to translate something from a long book into a short film. Of course. But I don't mean that sort of thing. I mean, the biggest thing, I guess, the broadest thing that I think I would point to is one of the things that I was praising the book for throughout and was really appreciating this time through was the work of subcreation that Umberto Eco did in bringing us inside this subcreated medieval world. And the effort that he put into attempting to imagine and to help us to hear and imagine how the medieval people thought and how they talked. And this film doesn't even vaguely attempt that. In place of that, within this film, we just get like a bunch of Hollywood stereotypes of the Middle Ages trotted out all over the place. Some of which bear some resemblance to things that happen in the book, but not much. One thing that I would point to, and several of you, so one of you was mentioning this earlier on, I don't remember which, the reference to the Book of Revelations. It comes up in conjunction with the murders, but it's dismissed by almost everybody as like the merest fanaticism, right? Like as if only fanatics actually care about the Book of Revelation, right? Instead of having the Book of Revelation be like the entire like warp and woof of the story, right? And everybody, like it being the Book of Revelation forms not only the vocabulary, but like the worldview and the intellectual, spiritual, even emotional in a sense, framework of the whole story of The Name of the Rose. And yet it gets, it's the lens. It's the lens through which everybody sees everything. Even William, though he's not as like, yes, the Antichrist is coming as everybody else. But even William uses that as a lens. And instead, we just like anyone who refers to the Book of Revelation as just a crazy fanatic. Like it's just, we get the monks, like when the bodies are discovered and somebody mentions Revelation, it's Ubertino, right? Because they conflate him and Alenardo, which I missed Alenardo, but anyway, do you remember what happened as soon as they mentioned Revelation? All the monks like throw their hands up in the air and are like, "Oh, the end of the world!" Right? I mean, and like it's just like nonsense. It's like completely like it's like we're supposed to laugh at it. And I really, really dislike that. Now, Jocelyn, I absolutely agree that Jocelyn says, how can you visually translate a worldview that believes in revelation to an audience that doesn't know what that means? Totally agree. Totally agree. Would be very hard to do. What I would say is, yes, that would be very challenging. I don't believe it to be impossible, because people can do amazing things, but it would be hard. Totally acknowledge. My recommendation, how to make it better, how to make it awesome, would be to find a way to do that. How to make it better, just leave it out. Just leave it out. I mean, they almost did anyway, right? I mean, the quotient of like references to the apocalypse in the film is like orders of magnitude less, right, than in the book. So as it was, they almost removed the book of Revelation from the story entirely anyway. I'd have just gone whole hog. It's the simplest thing to do, right? Just don't even go there. I agree, First Fish, that it'd be difficult, but it wouldn't be impossible to do it. Yes, I agree. Now, so there are some ways, of course, in which the story is simplified, which have to happen. Like, again, you've got to compress the story. So I'm not, of course, and as many of you, it was funny, some of you were talking about, you would love to hear what Maggie has to say about this. My co-host, of course, from Other Minds and Hands, are Maggie Park and I discussing film adaptation of books. And I have to admit, I kept like forgetting that when I was watching this film, when I was rewatching it just this past week, I kept forgetting that I was doing this for Mythgard Academy. Like I kept catching myself as I was watching the film saying like, oh, I can't wait to talk to Maggie about that. And then I was like, oh, wait, I'm not going to be talking to Maggie about that. Anyway, so, but yeah, as Maggie and I have discussed many times, when you're trying to tell a vastly compressed story, hang on a second. Let me just check. Checking on my phone. How long is the unabridged audiobook? The unabridged audiobook is 17 and a half hours long. So the audiobook is 17 and a half hours. The film is 2 hours, right? So you've got lots of compression you have to do. So there are many, of course, I'm not going to go back on all of the wonderful training that Maggie has given me and just complain about everything that's changed or everything that's different. That's okay. That's necessary. For instance, Adso is a Franciscan. He's like a novice Franciscan, kind of, I guess. And of course, in making him a Franciscan instead of a Benedictine, which of course he is in the book, you lose some of the tension between him and William and the kind of the disconnect between them and those ways in which Adso is kind of caught in the middle between his master, William the Franciscan, on the one hand, and the abbot and the abbey, the other Benedictines to whom he sort of belongs. Yes, JJ says Adso's a Franciscan, literally unwatchable now. Yeah, I hear you. Anyway, there's lots of ways in which the thing is streamlined, and I don't object to that. There was much care taken this is not just a B movie thrown together haphazardly, right? This was a major film, and it had very significant actors. Now, I don't think they knew how significant Christian Slater was going to be at the time. Like, by the age of 17, how well had Christian Slater established himself exactly, right? I'm not quite sure, though I'm like tempted to actually look. Now I have to look this up. Hang on a second. But Sean Connery had been established a fair bit, right? And apparently he was like very keen for this role. Okay, hang on. I'm looking up Christian Slater. And I'm looking up all the roles that he's been in. And now I'm like scrolling to the bottom. Okay. So the first thing he was in was when he was 7. He appeared as a boy actor. Okay. 1 episode in All My Children. He had been in a couple things. Name of the Rose is early. It was before any of his major roles. Like, I mean, I'm old enough to remember in the late 80s when he really kind of burst on the scene as a major figure, like in Heathers and Gleaming the Cube. And that was in like 88, 89, which is a couple years after this. So yeah, it seems fair to say that not necessarily this wasn't his beginning or his big break, but it was the very beginning of his trajectory there. Anyway, but a good deal of so yeah, the weird hair, they're trying to do the tonsure, which was a medieval custom, shaving the top of the head. And it, like, so did monks and friars look dorky? Yeah, they did, actually. That's legit. Though, yes, I agree. Some tonsures looked more normal than others. You can't quite see it in this shot. I loved Malachi's like little like coronet of spiky hair sticking straight out, like he's bald on the. I mean, oh yeah, the Malachi was phenomenal. Yeah, it kind of like a really, really ugly Statue of Liberty. Yeah. But anyhow, yes, Fan R was, you're a particular fan of the Abbott's tonsure, are you? Yeah, I hear that. What is the film story? So, again, it's the flattening of things. It's the simplification of things. It's the replacement of really rich and complex and interesting intellectual themes with stereotypes and, you know, I don't know, things that they thought would be crowd pleasing, that I found disappointing in the story. Jorge is simply an anti-intellectual fanatic, right? I mean, he intellectual pride, which you'll remember, major feature. Intellectual pride is brought up. Like that phrase is used a few times in the film, but only ever of William. He's accused of intellectual pride. Like the fact that William A is intelligent and B employs his intelligence and values intelligence and learning. Those things make him weird and deviant and probably heretical. The real, like the Orthodox Christians in this film are brainless fanatics instead. And Jorge is the spokesperson. He's the representative of that, right? Sort of like, well, Jorge and Bernardo Gui, as they say. Sorry, Yorgi, I forget, Yorge, Venerable Yorgi, as they called him, Yorge. Yeah. Anyway, whatever. I missed very badly the debate between, I'm going to keep calling him Jorge because he's Spanish, between Jorge and William. Not just at the end in the library, but at like in the beginning with the laughter, right, in the scriptorium. You will remember that was a scholarly debate session where they both kept quoting different authorities and undermining each other's arguments and everything else, right? It was at beginning and end. We saw this this debate. There's no debate in the film. Again, Jorge is just a brainless fanatic whose whole thing is anti-intellectual, right? And his whole thing is about suppressing the mind, suppressing intellectual. Again, like faith is equated with fanaticism, and intellect and intelligence is equated with heresy, and is like there can be no place for learning and intellect within the church, according to this film. And I find that, well, not only slightly offensive, but of course a very wide departure from the book. And all of the concerns of the book. Again, this is one of the several ways when you remove that, when you remove the element of intellectual pride, not just in William, but in Jorge as well. It strips down the story so much that I had a hard time enjoying that. And the library. Think of the library. I'll come back to the girl. The library. I sort of gasped aloud when I realized that the library was not just off limits, but secret. Like, I had a moment of confusion in that scene when William and Adso are in the scriptorium and they say, William says, "What do they do with all the books?" Right? And I'm like, what do you mean, what do they do with all the books? What kind of a question is that? Where do you think they put the books? They put the books in the library, right? But then he's like, then I realized that the film was asking me to accept that what was happening in that moment was that William was deducing the existence of the library, right? And he then makes it more explicit afterwards when he points up at the edificium and is like, "What do you think is up there?" "A library." And I'm like, right, like the famous library fencing frog. Exactly. So that was bizarre. Well, at first I thought it was bizarre, but then I'm like, no, it all fits. Right. And even the Escher stairs here, right? And I say Escher stairs. You notice there are multiple places where the stairs like go up from the same place instead of winding around. They like in both the middle and the bottom of this image here. Anyway, whatever. It's deliberately Escher-like. What's the difference? But it makes sense in the context of the difference between the book library and the movie library, right? The book library is designed to preserve knowledge and to make that knowledge accessible to visiting scholars like Venantius, right? There are many people who come, and William, of course, is not permitted by the abbot to visit the library. He wants to go browse, right? And he's not allowed to go browse, which bothers him. But it's not like they don't give any of the books. You can get most of the books, right? There are some books that you're not going to be allowed access to, and you're not going to be allowed to browse. But it is designed to make it available. And the whole secret of the library, the whole labyrinth in the book, is not just a way to keep people out. It's a way to find. It's a code system, right? It's a classification system. It's like the Abbey decimal system for finding the stuff, right? And in the movie, the library, from top to bottom, from beginning to end, the whole point of the library is to hide books, to prevent anyone reading them. Now, that makes, of course, the scriptorium more useless than usual. The purpose of this abbey is to have this huge scriptorium in which monks work all day long making manuscripts, so that which then vanish and no one is supposed to ever ask where they went to, right? We devote our time to copying and writing books so that nobody will ever read them. I know, Eric, I was thinking the same thing. What is the scriptorium for? What do the monks in the scriptorium think the scriptorium is for? Right? I mean, anyway, so that was a little bit odd. But again, it fits with the whole fanaticism thing, right? The library becomes a treasure trove, but a hidden treasure. It's like dragon treasure. Except not unlike dragon treasure. It's like dragon treasure if the dragon hated treasure and just stored up treasure in order to make sure nobody could have it. Right? William's discovery of the library and his joy. I mean, those were fun scenes. Yeah, those were fun scenes. But unfortunately, it seemed to me all to fit within the overarching theme of faith equals fanaticism, and any exercise of the intellect is heresy. They love and hate the library as they love and hate themselves, Fencing Frog. Perhaps so. It's the evil miser trope from Victorian literature. That's interesting, Sharon. It is like that in some ways. Almost. The dynamics aren't quite the same, but it is interesting. It is an interesting parallel. But of course, as we all know, Hollywood has rarely found a love interest it didn't want to amplify. So I was not surprised to find, that the love interest and the love dynamic was not only amplified, though not so much. Like, Adso is in fact fairly fixated on the girl in the book as well, right? So it's not like that part of it was emphasized. But they made her have a happy ending. They forced a happy ending upon it, right? Like the lovers are never guilty. It's just like Agatha Christie, right? So they gave them an almost happy ending. The story of the girl, who is, I feel reasonably confident, not a witch, has a disappointingly unresolved ending. We don't see her die. We're told to expect that she dies. Yeah. Anyway, the part of their treatment of the love story that made me roll my eyes most often was William's reaction to it, right? You know, talk about this, one of those moments when, again, instead of, they did two things in lieu of Umberto Eco's very careful secondary world, you know, his subcreation of like how medievals would think and feel and talk. They did a combination of two things instead. They just appealed to modern medieval stereotypes, and they did that other thing, which I digressed into talking about last night in exploring the Lord of the Rings, when I was talking about, we got to talking about rhetorical modes in the Lord of the Rings, and we ended up getting diverted to talking about movies that take place in the medieval era, theoretically, but where they don't, like where everybody talks like modern people. The two examples we were discussing briefly were A Knight's Tale and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And I was saying last night that the difference is that A Knight's Tale at least does it on purpose, right? That is, it owns it. Like it's from the beginning, a deliberate mashup of modern sensibilities and therefore rhetoric, and medieval times. Fencing Frog, you have precisely the line that I was, that launched me on this side track. When Adso is having trouble sleeping because he is tormented with memories of his encounter with a girl and the love that is now blooming in his young heart. And he says to William, "Can I confess something to you?" And he says, "I would rather you tell me as a friend," right? And I was like, oh, good grief. Like I rolled my eyes so hard when he said that. And anyway, so yeah, it's like, I'm like, it's not even trying. Like it's not even trying. And so in that way, I'm not even trying to do the medieval thing. I mean, so they're going to do the love story. They're going to give it a happy ending. And I'm like, okay, fine. Yeah. And well, and I don't want to just like, devolve into like giving pet peeves. But I will say one of the most painful medieval stereotypes that was wholeheartedly indulged by this film, most painful to me to see, that is the depiction of the common people as animals. It's just hideous and horrible and demeaning. And I know that there's the impression I get is that they think they're being sensitive, right? That they think they're being like, oh, we're trying to show you how hard the peasants had it, right? And we want to, like, in some sense, perhaps engender compassion for realization for how hard it was to be a medieval peasant or whatever. But yeah, I just, it kind of bugs me. Even small things, like for instance, how they depict medieval people, even those who don't have poison blackened tongues, as like having just like totally blackened, rotten teeth, right? This is a very, very common TV and movie thing. And it's a lie. Medieval people had great teeth, better teeth than modern people had. Why? No, they had poor oral hygiene, but they also had no sugar. So they didn't rot out their teeth. And so, yes, like you look at medieval skeletons and you find a pretty good set of teeth in peasants' heads. But again, it's just that the desire to make medieval people in general and peasants in particular appear nasty and brutish, fencing frog, as you say, is yeah, and yes, and they lived a long time. Exactly. First fish. They did not die of old age at the age of 30 or something like that. Yes, they died of disease, and many of them died young. Comparatively few of them lived to adulthood. But anyway, so yeah. Again, pet peeves. But again, the point is, I had a hard time when I was watching it. I was trying to follow, like, what is the film asking me to accept? Like, what is the story here of the film? And there seemed to me a very tenuous connection between the things that the book is interested in and what the book story is about and what the film story was about. That was hard. The one thing I will give them props for, I was ready at the end when, like, he meets the girl again who survives being burned at the stake, or not almost burned at the stake. I was totally ready for Adso to, like, run off with her and the two of them to live happily ever after. Like, I would not have been shocked. Like, I found myself emotionally prepared for that ending, but they didn't do it. They had him leave her behind and not even know his name. So, okay. Yeah, I like that. I was surprised and pleased that they had Adso choosing to go with William instead of staying with her. Yeah. Okay. Now, of course, obviously, the depiction of the Inquisition was rather predictable and everything so much flatter and so much simpler. None of the complex and interesting play in which Umberto Eco, remember, kind of implicates us with the Inquisition. I thought the clumsiest plot element in the film, and which went almost completely unresolved, was Bernardo Gui arresting William, right? Like, William was gonna get hauled back and thrown into prison. Yeah. So, and he's got a great tonsure, by the way. Like, I think he looks awesome. Anyway, the whole business of, like, the personal confrontation between William and Bernardo, felt, it was a simplification. Clearly, in the book also, the two of them are the opposing, like, masterminds, right? Not of the whole story, but when Bernard Guy is, and I call him Guy instead of Gui because in the book, his name is not Bernardo, it's Bernard, and he comes from Avignon. So it sounds, anyway, the English translation at least makes it sound like his name is French. Yeah. Feanaro, I agree. I also get why they killed Bernard on screen, but it also felt to me like it kind of missed the point. It was very much like Saruman in the Jackson films, Jackie. In fact, like, when I saw that, I was startled. I was like, was Jackson actually alluding to this moment? Because, you know, the evil wizard mastermind dude, right, plummeting down onto a spiky wheel and I was like, is that actually a reference I never got before? I mean, we know that, Peter Jackson and his folks were, are always making references to films that influence them and stuff. Yeah, I mean, it'd be an interesting question to ask at some point. Were you thinking of The Name of the Rose when you had Saruman impaled on a spiky wheel? But yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to believe they hadn't seen it. But it doesn't matter exactly whether it's influence or not, but it was interesting. I don't think they mention it, Sharon. I feel sure I would have remembered. I mean, when I was watching the Jackson films, I had read The Name of the Rose comparatively recently. So I'm sure I would have noticed that. I'm sure I would have perked up at that in the commentary. But yes, I don't think they mention it. But it would be interesting to ask. Anyhow, but just that, again, the flatter simplification. But again, notice the final dynamic. The death of Bernardo Gui. His flight during the burning of the abbey. His accident, and then the peasants taking their vengeance, right? Yeah. I see. Yes, you're right. Of course, Sharon. At that moment in the commentary, they were talking about Christopher Lee telling Peter what a man stabbed by a knife sounds like. Yes, that's exactly what they're discussing there. Yes. Anyway, given how the church is depicted in the film, and Bernardo is the evil mastermind, he's the one to whom, Malachi is the abbot's underling. And Malachi is saying from the beginning, like, we should get Bernardo Gui in here, right? He's pining for the Inquisition. Malachi is the whole time. And the abbot, of course, defers to him as well. So, like, all of the, Orthodox church people, of all of them, the Inquisitor is clearly the apex and sort of representative. And Gerald, the abbot vanishes. We never see what happens to the abbot. He just goes away entirely. Anyway, so the final toppling of his wagon and by the peasants, right? To whom he's asking for help, first begging and then threatening. And they push his little buggy off the cliff and he plummets to his death, his gruesome spiky death. That's clearly supposed to be sort of satisfying, right? The bad guy gets it. The people overthrowing the church is what we're seeing. It's like it's like a little preview of the French Revolution or something. And again, it feels sort of, it felt a little kind of sloppy in some ways also, not just simplified and dumbed down and stereotyped, but sloppy in the sense that the film presented in the first part, particularly with Jorge and, Jorge and William, that the primary opposition was between fanatical faith and dangerous intellectualism, dangerous from a church perspective, intellectualism, with all of the sympathies of the viewer being recruited on the side of intellectualism, of course. But then at the end, like this third dynamic comes in, like we have the people and the peasants who were being oppressed, by, even repressed, one could argue, are certainly not on William's side. They're not on the side of intellectualism. So again, it's just like this, it becomes a whole separate dynamic. Like, so does intellectualism win? Well, I guess in that they survive, right? Like William and Adso survive, though how William survives is not at all clear. I'm not going to lie. I thought that Adso was going to end up with the girl, and I thought that William was going to live. I thought William was going to die in the fire. I thought William was going to Benno it, right? And him be the one who dies with the library. That final, what I thought was final image of him with the books, right? With him like hugging the books on the table with his eyes closed while the fire goes in around him, right? The last we see before he miraculously and quite inexplicably shows up again. With the books, right? He's rescued some of the books. Anyway, I thought it would have been awesome if they'd killed William in the fire. I thought that would have been a daring change. And it would have been a little bit more coherent, I think. Coherent as far as what the film was doing. But anyway, in the end, he survives. So fanaticism burns up in its own irrational fervor, or is plunged off the cliff and dies a well-deserved spiky death. And that leaves literally only, William and Adso walking out, right? So intellectualism doesn't win, but it escapes. And it survives. And off he goes, William that is, off he goes through the mist at the end, right? That closing scene with the girl, when the girl shows up. He rides off into the mist, headed towards the Renaissance, presumably. And there's Adso left to choose. My love interest on the one hand, the Renaissance to come on the other hand, right? And he chooses the Renaissance, apparently. And notice that not only did they end up not killing him on screen, like in the fire, they denied his death. Adso, our narrator Adso, film voiceover narrator Adso, says that he never knew what came of him. You know, he didn't know anything about how he died. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So what I find is that I was disappointed. I kind of enjoyed the film the first time I saw it many years ago. Though, by the way, one other puzzling thing is that apparently I watched it on Prime Video. And apparently the version of this film that you get on Prime Video is the expurgated version. 'Cause I remember watching this film when I was in college for the first time. After I'd read the book, I saw the film. And I remember being kind of surprised by the sex scene, which was fairly graphic. There was a lot of nudity. And I was like, and I remember the people that I was watching with who hadn't read the book being like, well, this movie just took a sudden turn. It was striking. But then when I was just watching it again this past week on Prime Video, it just jump cut. It skipped it completely. You see her coming and approaching him, like her face appearing. And then it cuts to Salvatore trying to eat a rat and William's conversation with him. And then it cuts back to Adso putting his shirt on by himself, like him sitting up after she's gone. Like the entire sexual encounter got cut out of the film in this, sort of Victorian sort of way. Which, like, on the one hand, I was like, it's fine. I could kind of fill in the details and stuff. But I have to admit that I had been looking forward to it, thinking about the Song of Solomon. Like, I wanted to see if there would be like any memory of the Song of Solomon thing or a voiceover of it. Like, I was particularly keen to, because I didn't remember if during, like, if there was any voiceover or any of the kind of overlay. I don't think there was. As I recall, it was just silent. But anyway, I was going to be kind of interested, since the scene was so funny in the book. I wanted to see if there was any memory of it, but I don't think there was in any case. But I thought it was going crazy. Cause I watched, I actually like rewound it. I'm like, did I just miss it? Cause I tend to watch, I was cooking dinner while I was watching it. And so I'm like, did I just space out? Like, did the sex scene, how did I miss that? So I rewound and I'm like, no, I didn't miss it. Like it just didn't happen. And then I was like, I had just like Umberto Eco in the prologue, right? I'm like, did I come across a forgery? Am I remembering this correctly? Am I fabricating like the scene that I recall from when I saw it in the 90s? And no, I was not. So yeah, there it was, just cut out. But I know it exists because when I was searching for images, of Adso. Like I was Googling like images of Adso and the girl to put up on my slide recently. And I came across some of the other ones and I was like, okay, that scene did get shot. In fact, I do remember actually seeing that. Yeah. Anyway, here's my own personal final take home in thinking about this particular adaptation. This movie made me realize why I enjoy The Rings of Power so much. Because The Rings of Power and The Name of the Rose adaptation are almost on opposite poles of each other on a particular spectrum. The Name of the Rose is a pretty good movie, I think. I mean, if you're not particular about some of the things that bother me. Again, I know, like, I'm a medievalist. I have hang-ups about medieval stereotypes. They bother me less than they used to. I mean, oh man, like my wife used to not even, like, she wouldn't even watch medieval movies with me because she's like, you are insufferable when we're watching these things. So like I used to complain so much. So again, like whatever, like if you don't have my particular hang-ups with that sort of thing, and you're not offended by the whole faith equals fanaticism thing, then I think it's a good film. And many people seem to like the film. So it's like, so as far as like the narrative shape of the film in general, the acting, I mean, it's like, it's a competent movie, right? But Whereas the Rings of Power, there are issues. Like, there are awkwardnesses. It's not a perfectly executed show by any stretch, right? But although The Name of the Rose is a well-produced film, its substance, it's almost, when I want to think about it, when I want to think about its ideas, especially, and relate them to the book, I find that I can find very little evidence that the film is thinking about the book at all. It's familiar with the book. Again, it's quite faithful to the book in many ways. One could easily call it a very faithful adaptation of the book. Again, of everything that doesn't matter. But it's not a film that, in my opinion, shows any interest in thinking, in engaging with the ideas that the book is engaging with. The Rings of Power does. The Rings of Power, awkward in many ways, things you can not like about it, but it is engaging with Tolkien's ideas. It is thinking about it. And in some really, really fascinating ways. Not that I love and agree with all of the, their takes or whatever, but it's doing that stuff, right? There's stuff there. So again, it's like the opposite, in a sense, of The Name of the Rose in that way. So I really enjoy thinking about Rings of Power because it is really thinking, it is engaging deeply. Whether you like how it's doing that or not, it's engaging deeply with Tolkien's text. I did not feel that this film, The Name of the Rose film, engaged deeply with the book, really much at all. And that was a little bit sad. Anyway, the end. Boom. See, look at that. So we have come to the end, my dear friends, of our discussion of The Name of the Rose. We will, in real time, be off for a few weeks. We will reconvene on the Wednesday after Mythmoot. That is Wednesday the 20-something. I think it might be the 25th, possibly, of June. And that will be our first discussion of the book that you cannot see, which is The Peoples of Middle-earth. Instead, it just enables you to see right through my torso to the logo behind me. Anyway, Peoples of Middle-earth is what we're going to discuss. So just read the beginning of The Peoples of Middle-earth. We will discuss the foreword. We will start with the foreword and the prologue. I doubt we'll get much further than the prologue. Oh, and there's an appendix on languages at there. I forgot about that. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we won't quite get to like chapter 1 per se. Oh my goodness, the appendix on language is interminable. Forgot how long that was. Yeah, no, we'll end up talking about a bunch of that. Okay. Yep. So we'll start with the appendix on languages, and the prologue, and the foreword. All right. We will work through, as of course we're going to be looking at a bunch of the appendix materials for the Lord of the Rings. All right. Very good, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for taking part in this wonderful discussion of The Name of the Rose. Really have been enjoying that. This has been fun, and I am looking forward next to completing the history of Middle-earth. Thanks, and yes, and after the Peoples of Middle-earth, we're going to do Fantastes by George MacDonald. So we've got the next couple books chosen, and then after that, an open election. Post History of Middle-earth, we will see what we do after that. All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night now.